I'd been approached about doing a lot of sort of summer blockbusters, and the thing about it is that I just am someone who I have to feel connected emotionally to what I do. And one of the things that I loved about Rise was that, having been a lifelong Planet of the Apes fan and always having wanted to be an ape from when I was a kid, when I saw Rise, I was blown away because I finally felt like I became an ape, but not the way that I thought I was going to with like the John Chambers makeup, but emotionally. I thought that the way that using the technology and Andy Serkis's performance, you're able to relate so deeply to a character that was CG. The most human character in that story is not a human, he's an ape. And to me, what was most important was that we carry forward that story. I felt like I'd seen post-apocalyptic human stories as the center of the story, and I didn't really want that to be the center of this story. I wanted that to be part of this story. But what I was interested in was seeing the world that Cesar creates. He goes off into the Muir Woods with these apes, and what do? And so I thought, in the way that like 2001 begins with the dawn of man, wouldn't it be cool if we could begin with the dawn of apes and see them in their lives and see the civilization that they're creating, the beginning of language, the beginning of the sort of symbolic expressions. They're wearing war paint, they have pictograms, and really a story about family. And be connected to Cesar and his family, only then to discover that there were still humans and that there was a human family, and then let the whole story be a story about the question of whether or not we could avoid violence. I mean, what's so great about Planet of the Apes is, as a metaphor, the big conceit is, of course, that the animals have taken over the world, but the secret is that we are animals, and that the idea of Planet of the Apes is looking into the ape's face, is looking into our own souls. And so that, for me, was really what's exciting, because knowing that the 68 film is the trajectory that we're moving toward, and knowing that it becomes Planet of the Apes, but knowing that Rise was not Planet of the Apes, and that Dawn was beginning at a time when we didn't even know that there were still humans, this becomes the one moment in time where it could have gone differently. It could have been that moment where it became Planet of the Humans and the Apes. And so I really wanted to explore the hopeful possibilities, the ways in which it could have been different, the ways in which there are connections that could be made, but then also see that kind of pull toward violence and the suspense of whether or not they could avoid violence or when it was going to turn to war. And given that we know the ending, we know it does, but the question is how, and to involve you emotionally in that story. That was my biggest goal. For me, what's exciting about movies, what I think the power of cinema is empathy. The idea is you go to the movies and the lights go out and you become those characters on the screen, and you relate to their experiences, though you may never have had that experience in your life. And the idea is that somehow you come to an understanding, another point of view. And that's what I loved about the idea that, as through motion capture, that you could have that experience through sentient apes, like completely bizarre, right? And I guess what was important to me in that concept of empathy was that there be no villains at all in the story, that all of the characters, human and ape, had arrived at their point of view through a very justified existence, which was their own life experience. And so that was really important to me, because I figured that I didn't want there to be any easy answers, like, oh, I get it, he's just the bad guy. I wanted you to understand that this is the thing that creates those kinds of obstacles between people, between understanding. And so that becomes a very exciting story all of a sudden. And it was really important to me and to all of the actors that we not depict villains. Well, that all comes down to the actors. I mean, the truth of the matter is that once you get past the first 5 minutes of seeing that Andy Serkis is wearing a camera on a helmet and dots on his face and on his body, which is really just a technical thing so they can capture his performance and his movement, that goes away because he's such a good actor. And so the biggest relief for me in starting, I was worried that the technical aspects would be an obstacle to my working with the actors. And when I realized how it worked and realized what an amazing actor Andy was, and the idea of bringing people like Toby Kebbell in to play Koba, like, mocap acting is no different from any kind of acting. The big thing here that was different was that Terry Notary, who plays Rocket, he needed to train the actors to move like apes, But that wasn't actually a technical thing, that was a physical thing, because the motion that would capture is going to be faithful to whatever the actors do, and then Weta's going to amazingly translate that into the anatomy of these apes, because the humans and apes have different bodies in many ways. But the thing about it is that if we could get the ape performers to move in a way that was believable, and then they performed through their performances the way they would do any scene, then suddenly you realize, oh, this is no different at all. And the people who were playing the human actors were so excited to see that. It was like, oh, wait a minute, this is just about me playing a scene with Andy Serkis. That's amazing. And so you would think that it's an obstacle to those things, but it actually is very invisible in certain ways. In other ways, the technical aspects are daunting. I mean, taking this equipment into these very tough conditions was very challenging. Taking a 3D camera, which is 2 cameras on fiber optic cable, into elements that are not really supposed to be, and you're supposed to keep the connections between all these fiber optic cables impeccably clean, or it could really not work. And we were in the mud, we were in the rain, we were in the freezing cold, and all of that adds to the realism, but it was challenging for the crew. And all of those kinds of things are complexities, but you just accept that as par for the course. To me, what Cesar is like Moses for the apes, right? He was a revolutionary, he led them out of bondage, and now he's leading them through this difficult time. And we know that he has his heart in both species, because his father was essentially human. He wasn't his biological father, but James Franco, as Will, was his father and raised him. And as Andy describes it, he felt in certain ways like he was human. It was like a revelation to him to discover that he was different. And that was a painful thing, but then he sort of discovered the ape in him, and then through this civilization, I wanted him to really revel in his primal nature and his connection to the apes around him. And so he is now in a place where, with that moment of peace having passed, where he's going to go through the greatest test of his life. And this is going to be a very painful thing for him, because this is a battle that he did not want. And now he's going to have to engage in it in order to protect those he loves, in order to have the species survive. And this is going to be a real test for his character, and it's going to be a test for the apes. So I think, and not only that, but I also look at it, it's such a long journey between here and the '68 film. I also think it's a family generational story. That I kept thinking of this movie in a weird way, almost like the Godfather films with apes, right? Like you've got those were really Shakespearean tales in a gangster mode. So you have like a king and his sons. Well, this is really a king and his sons. And that story and how that's going to lead to Planet of the Apes, I think, is a rich vein that could go on for quite some time.